Okay, so relationships, right?
Yeah.
They can be tricky even when you're like basically living in each other's pockets.
Yeah.
But then you throw in some distance, like, I don't know, a few hundred miles, maybe even thousands,
Uh-huh.
and suddenly it's a whole different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're diving into today. Long-distance relationships, or LDRs for short.
Right.
Whether it's work, school, family, whatever's keeping you apart, we're going to explore how to make love work across the distance,
It's a challenge for sure.
for sure. And you know what? Our sources for this deep dive don't sugarcoat things. They get real about the hurdles.
Absolutely.
But hey, think of it this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Forewarned is forearmed. We're going to give you the tools to navigate the bumps in the road.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe even discover some hidden strengths along the way. What do you think?
I think that's a great way to look at it. It's interesting because whether it's for work or school or family reasons, the core challenges that couples in LDRs face, they're often surprisingly similar.
Totally.
And understanding those challenges, well, it's like having a cheat sheet for not just surviving, but actually thriving in a long-distance relationship.
It's like unlocking a secret level in the game of love, right?
Exactly.
And speaking of cheat sheets, one thing that really jumped out at me from our sources was this whole idea of managing expectations.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the beginning, it's all fireworks and stolen weekends and, that constant back and forth texting.
The anticipation of that next visit.
Yes, it's like a constant honeymoon phase.
Right.
But then reality sets in,
Yeah.
right? And those initial expectations, well, they can start to shift.
They definitely do. The honeymoon phase, it can fade.
Mm.
And then feelings of loneliness or longing, maybe even some anxiety, those start to creep in.
Yeah,
But here's the thing to remember. Those feelings are totally normal.
yeah.
They're not a sign that you're not cut out for this LDR thing or that your relationship is doomed.
That's good to hear.
In fact, acknowledging those feelings, like really addressing them head on, that's key to building a stronger connection.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? Because our sources keep hammering on this point about communication.
Yeah, well, communication, it's essential in any relationship, right?
Totally.
But in an LDR, it's the lifeline.
It's the main artery keeping everything flowing.
Exactly. One source even compared it to, trying to decipher emotions through a tiny text box.
Ooh, yeah.
It's so easy for misunderstandings to pop up when you don't have those subtle cues of being physically present, to guide you.
Oh, tell me about it. Remember that time you thought your partner sounded, like, distant on a video call?
Mhm.
And your mind instantly went to, like, the worst-case scenario.
Oh, yeah, and it turned out his Wi-Fi was just acting up.
Exactly. It's so easy to let those little things spiral when you don't have all the information.
Totally. So what can you do about it? Well, our sources suggest something pretty simple, but it's powerful. Being incredibly clear and direct in your communication.
Like, no beating around the bush.
Exactly. Think about setting regular check-in times, expressing your feelings openly, and maybe even double-checking if something seems off instead of letting your imagination run wild.
So, like, proactive communication.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing those misunderstandings, it's also about actively fostering intimacy, even when you're miles apart.
Okay, so let's talk about intimacy, because I think this is where a lot of people are like, wait, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
But our sources actually encourage us to think beyond just the physical. They suggest seeing this as an opportunity to nurture emotional intimacy in creative ways.
Right. It's about finding those unique ways to connect that go beyond the physical.
Okay, so sure, virtual dates are great,
Mm-hmm.
but think about, like, sharing experiences, maybe sending handwritten letters, or even just taking the time to truly listen and be present during those calls or video chats.
Making those moments count.
I love that.
Yeah.
One source even mentioned sending care packages or finding little ways to surprise each other.
Yeah.
It's like those small acts of love can mean so much when you can't physically be there.
Absolutely.
But, okay, we can't talk about intimacy without, addressing the elephant in the room, the physical aspect.
Right. It's a natural human need. It's something that LDR couples need to address openly and honestly.
For sure.
It's about finding ways to navigate those desires that feel comfortable and respectful for both partners.
Yeah.
And this just reinforces the idea that honest communication is really the bedrock of any successful LDR.
Okay, so we've tackled communication, intimacy, but what about those times when loneliness and insecurity inevitably creep in? When the distance feels especially heavy.
Well, first of all, remember those feelings. They're totally normal.
Okay.
They're normal reactions to being physically separated from someone you care about. It doesn't mean you're not strong enough or that your relationship is falling apart.
So what can couples do to, like, manage those tougher emotions? Besides binging on ice cream and rom-coms?
Well, those can help sometimes. But our sources, they offer some really practical advice. Self-care is huge.
Oh yeah, self-care.
You need to make sure you're taking care of your physical and mental well-being. That means getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, and doing things that bring you joy.
Yes. And I think that ties into another point they make about engaging in hobbies and interests.
Right.
It's so easy to become so focused on the distance that you lose sight of your own life outside the relationship.
It happens.
But it's crucial to stay connected to those things that bring you joy, right? Things that make you feel like a whole person.
Absolutely. Staying engaged in your own life, it's vital. It helps you grow as an individual, and ultimately, it makes you a stronger and more fulfilled partner, regardless of the distance.
Okay, so we've covered communication, intimacy, and dealing with those waves of loneliness. What else do our sources flag as like a major challenge in LDRs?
Well, one thing that really stands out is the issue of trust. Well, one thing that really stands out is the issue of trust. It becomes even more crucial when you don't have those everyday in-person interactions to provide
That
reassurance.
makes total sense.
Think about it. You're relying on communication, promises kept, a deep emotional connection to keep that sense of trust strong.
So how do couples in LDRs, how do they actually build that rock-solid foundation of trust when physical reassurance is so limited? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Well, one of our sources had a great phrase for it: radical transparency.
Ooh, like that.
It's about being reliable, of course, and keeping your word, but it's also about being present emotionally, even when you're physically miles apart.
Okay.
Think about offering reassurance through words, regular check-ins, really listening to each other's concerns. It's like actively demonstrating your trustworthiness over and over again.
I can see how those little acts of reassurance, they can really add up over time.
Mm.
It's like building a bridge brick by brick until you have something solid enough to carry you through those tough times, right?
Exactly. But remember, we're not just navigating the internal dynamics of the relationship, right? Couples in LDRs often face external pressures too, which can add a whole other layer of complexity.
Oh, for sure. Like dealing with skeptical friends or family members who just don't get the whole LDR thing.
Yeah.
They might question your choices or make comments that, even if they're well-intentioned, can put a strain on an already challenging situation.
Right. And here's where that communication strength we talked about earlier, that really comes in handy again.
Okay.
If your loved ones aren't on board, try having an open and honest conversation with them. Explain why this relationship is important to you, what your goals are, how you're making it work.
Right.
Sometimes a little understanding can go a long way.
Totally. And that actually leads perfectly into another challenge that came up in our sources: the whole juggling act of balancing personal responsibilities with the demands of an LDR.
Oh, yeah.
How do you manage work, school, family obligations, and still nurture a relationship that already requires like extra effort because of the distance? It can feel overwhelming.
It is a real balancing act. And one of the keys, according to our sources, is setting clear boundaries.
Andres, yeah.
You need to carve out dedicated time for your partner without neglecting those other important aspects of your life.
Okay, so how do you actually do that?
Well, this might mean scheduling those video calls in advance, planning virtual dates, or even just setting aside some tech-free time to talk or email without distractions.
So it's about being intentional, proactive with your time, rather than letting things just happen, haphazardly.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding the time, it's also about using that time wisely.
Okay.
When you do connect, really be present. Put away distractions, close the laptop, truly focus on each other. Quality over quantity, right?
Totally. It's like sending the message that this connection is precious, something worth protecting and prioritizing. And, one thing that really struck me while going through these sources was how much emphasis they put on future planning as a key ingredient for LDR success.
It's so crucial.
Right.
Having shared goals, a timeline for when you might be able to close the distance, it can give you something tangible to work towards.
For sure.
It keeps you motivated during those tough times.
One source even shared a heartwarming anecdote about a couple who'd been long distance for years while pursuing their careers.
Oh,
It always talked about living in the same city, and they finally made it happen.
oh.
It was so inspiring to see how that shared vision kept them going and how they successfully navigated that transition to living together.
And that's a perfect segue into our next point. Even when couples have that happy ending of finally closing the distance, It's important to be prepared for the adjustments that come with actually living together.
Right, because it's not always as seamless as we imagine, is it?
Not always.
It's like you've built this whole relationship around video calls and weekend visits, and suddenly, bam, you're sharing a bathroom and figuring out whose turn it is to do the dishes.
Right.
It's a whole new ballgame.
It is. And our sources really stress the importance of communication and flexibility during this transition period.
Okay.
You have to be open to talking about your expectations for living together, your individual needs, how you can best support each other through those inevitable bumps in the road.
I'm starting to see a theme here. Communication is key, why? But, as we're talking about this, it strikes me that a lot of these challenges, these adjustments, they're not exclusive to couples who've been in long-distance relationships.
Right.
A lot of these are things that a and Y couple faces when they move in together, regardless of their history.
You're absolutely right. Our sources touch on that as well.
Yeah?
They acknowledge that while LDRs present, unique hurdles, the fundamental principles of successful relationships, communication, trust, respect, compromise, those are universal.
Those are the building blocks.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that LDR couples often have a head start in developing these skills.
Oh, interesting. It's almost like going through that long-distance phase
Yeah.
equips you with these super valuable relationship skills that can actually benefit you in the long run.
I couldn't agree more. Think about it. LDR couples have already mastered communication across time zones. They've learned to navigate conflict without physical presence. And they've built a foundation of trust that can withstand the challenges of distance.
Wow.
These are all strengths that can make them incredibly resilient partners, even when they're no longer miles apart.
It's like they've gone through this intensive relationship boot camp, emerged with superpowers that other couples might develop over a much longer period of time.
Exactly. So while we've been focusing on the challenges of LDRs, it's important to acknowledge that they can also foster a deep sense of appreciation and gratitude for the time you do have together.
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine how special those reunions must be after weeks or even months of being apart. It's like every moment becomes a celebration.
One of our sources even pointed out that some couples find that the distance actually strengthens their bond
Really?
because it forces them to be more intentional about their communication and prioritize quality time over quantity.
That's such an interesting perspective. It's like when you don't have the luxury of seeing each other every day, you learn to savor those phone calls, those video chats. And when you finally get to be together, it's pure magic.
It's like the distance amplifies those feelings of love and appreciation.
Yeah.
And it can also make couples more aware of their own individual needs and values, which ultimately can lead to a deeper understanding of themselves and each other.
I never thought about it that way, but it makes so much sense. When you're forced to spend time apart, you have that space to reflect on what's truly important to you, what you want out of life, and how your partner fits into that bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And when you come back together, you bring those insights with you, which can make the relationship even richer, more fulfilling.
Exactly. So while LDRs may not be the easiest path, they can be incredibly rewarding journeys of personal and relational growth.
So well said. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the initial excitement and eventual realities of LDRs to the emotional roller coaster, the communication hurdles, the challenges of intimacy, the importance of trust, self-care, future planning. It's clear that long-distance relationships require a special kind of commitment and resilience.
But as challenging as they can also be sources of incredible strength and growth.
And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question to ponder. We've spent this whole deep dive exploring the challenges of long-distance relationships. But what if we flip the script for a second?
Okay.
What if all the things that make LDRs so tough, the distance, the lack of physical contact, always having to be super clear with communication, what if those are actually like secret weapons in disguise?
I love that reframing. It makes you look past those surface level struggles.
Right.
And see the potential advantages hidden within those miles of separation.
Because maybe, just maybe, those challenges are forging strengths and benefits that traditional couples might totally miss.
Absolutely. Think about the level of communication LDR couples have to cultivate.
Yeah.
They can't just rely on those casual, everyday interactions that couples who live in the same place often take for granted.
Totally.
They have to be intentional. They have to put in the effort.
Yeah.
And that can actually lead to a depth and intimacy that's really remarkable.
It's like they're constantly working out those communication muscles.
Right.
Becoming like masters of expressing their needs, their feelings, their dreams, even those little everyday annoyances
Hmm.
that might otherwise go unsaid.
You're right. And that kind of communication mastery, that's valuable in any relationship, whether you're miles apart or end up living together.
For sure. And it's not just communication, right?
No.
LDRs can also force couples to be more independent, more self-reliant,
Yeah.
which can be super empowering.
That's so important. When you're not physically together all the time, you have space to pursue your own interests, hobbies,
Yeah.
really cultivate your own sense of self.
You're not so reliant on the other person.
And that makes you a more well-rounded and interesting person, which makes you a more engaging and fulfilling partner.
It's like that saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Right.
Maybe a little distance can actually help us appreciate our partners even more and prevent us from taking them for granted.
I love that perspective. And it's not just about appreciation, it's also about trust. LDR couples have to trust each other implicitly because they don't have that constant physical reassurance.
Right.
They have to believe in their partner's commitment, their loyalty, their ability to handle things on their own.
In that kind of trust, once you
Yeah.
build it, can create such a strong base for a lasting relationship.
Exactly. It's a bond forged in the fires of distance, tested over and over again. And if a couple can make it through that, they've proven their love can really withstand anything.
So, to anyone out there going through the ups and downs of a long-distance relationship,
Yeah.
know that you're not alone. It might be tough sometimes, but it can be incredibly rewarding for you as individuals, A and D, for the relationship.
And even if you're not in an LDR right now, there's so much we can learn from how resilient and resourceful these couples are.
Totally.
Because in the end, love doesn't care about distance. And the challenges we face, whether they're physical or emotional, can often lead to the most profound growth and connection.
Beautifully said. I think that's the perfect way to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to our awesome expert for all your insights today.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into love across the distance. Until next time, keep those conversations going, those connections strong, and those hearts open, no matter how many miles are between you and the ones you love.